format that we worked in. And then one day, I meet a young man who has actual footage of the cars getting crushed. And we said, okay, we got to get involved. And that kind of started the whole thing.
Well, Dean flatters me because, of course, Dean is like, 25 years younger than me? But but we were psyched when we tried to raise money for Who Killed the Electric Car for at least 6 months. Like Kathy Weiss isn't here, but it was really tough because everybody knows you don't make any money on documentaries, and it's unless you're an IMAX maker, I guess they make money. And Michael Moore made money a couple times, but it's a long slog, and it's very difficult to find an audience. And Dean jumped in and made Who Killed the Electric Car possible. But the film wouldn't have been a success without Miss Chelsea here. So Chelsea, why did you decide to participate in a documentary?
Well, I think if you recall, one of our earlier conversations was, I'd happy to help you behind the scenes, but I don't want to be in your movie. And you saying, no problem, I don't want you in my little movie. So we worked on it for a good 4 or 5 years before there was any version of me going to be in it. I saw a rough cut, I didn't appear in it once. I'm by far the shyest person in that little movie. We spent about 5 hours shooting in my mother's kitchen, and I'm doing one of these the whole time, and our producer, who has a mouth like nobody I've ever seen, which is why I adore her, came over and said, we're going to use 3 seconds of this. Chill the F out so we can all do this and go home. And I did, and the rough cut I saw had none of me in it. It was awesome, and then we went to Sundance and saw the relatively current version for the first time, and just died. And my husband was standing there the whole time going, your head is so big. So it was a little bit frying pan to fire, actually, from you.
Wow, this is like having to meet your therapist or something. That's right. I guess you were sort of the deep throat behind the scenes telling us what we needed to know.
Yeah.
And then at the very last second, you became the star.
It's become a great adventure, but it was an unforeseen one.
Yeah. Well, so the name of this panel, as Kitty suggested to us, was how to tell a story, storytelling in Hollywood. And, you know, of the three of us, Chelsea's on the road for car companies, for activists, really spreading the electric car word now for 10 years since our film was made, really being a firebrand and an evangelist for all things electric and plug-in, not just here, but you just got back from New Zealand, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's a tiny little country that has decided they want to go electric for...
I would dare say that, at least based on the 11:15 in the morning, that their turnout's going to be bigger than this turnout. They're so radically excited about electric cars in New Zealand, right?
They have managed, in their very first year participating in Drive Electric Week, to put together 53 events, which I think is more than we're doing in all of California.
Wow. So Chelsea, you reach a lot of people. What do you think the most powerful message is in terms of the storyteller on stage and even to the car companies about electric cars? Anything we heard on the stage earlier today, or what's your fundamental message at this point?
Well, I think when it comes to the storytelling, people care about people. And one of the reasons that film did so well was because of the human interest stories. But when it comes to promoting electric cars, it's like any other car. It's an emotional experience. They're very fun to drive. They're very cool and quiet and convenient and all these emotional experiences. And as an industry and as advocates, and so either way, whether you're talking about people or talking about cars or talking about anything else, it's the emotion of the story that is interesting to people and what they relate to.
Yeah, it really is about emotions and people. And in fact, when they saw who almost cried when they crushed that car, but I think a lot of it was a transference of affection for you as a person in the film, as your character. And, that's really, if you can make a car like a person, then you're going to.
I flipped the camera by mistake for a second there.
Right? Car companies have been doing that for years, I guess.
They've been doing it for years, except when it comes to EVs.
Except EVs, yeah. Well, documentaries are reaching more people thanks to Netflix and the sort of explosion of social media, but generally documentaries only reach a handful of people. And sometimes they're the people that count the most, but the guy sitting on the stage, the person sitting on the stage who's reached the most amount of people with his work is Dean Devlin. And Dean, you've had electric cars in your TV series, your movies.
Hey, you're welcome.
You've been really making it happen through narratives and through mass media. Can you tell us about how you work as an activist in that way?
Well, I think change happens slowly, and a lot of it is just getting used to an idea that you're not used to. So the more we can see something over and over again, the more we can accept it and then kind of judge it not for what it's not, but for what it is. you remember, when we were making this film, there were no more electric cars. You know, the title was "Who Killed the Electric Cars?" because electric cars were dead. There was this vague hope on the horizon, which showed up at the end of the film, but at that moment, it was a vague hope. And we're here today, and we're looking at all these electric cars, and every day there's another announcement about a new car company that wants to go into electrics. And I think that it took 10 years. I think it took all this time of people just slowly getting comfortable with this idea. You know, I remember when I first got the EV1, my mother wouldn't get in the car because she thought that the electricity would do something to her. You know, and I said, you're surrounded by electricity all day long in the house, but the car you're worried about? But again, it was new, it was a different thing. It was faster, and it was quiet, and all these things that was like, well, that's not what a car's supposed to be. And now I think people think that's what cars are supposed to be, and I think people want that everywhere. But I think that was a slow process of seeing it in movies and commercials and in the news, and slowly starting to get accustomed to this idea that this is gravity. It's going to happen. Better sooner than later.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that's reflected in celebrity culture. We live in Los Angeles. There's a lot of the world looks to what celebrities do. And I remember, I mean, Chelsea, you got the EV1 in the hands of a handful of celebrities. Like who was the first people to get those cars?
Well, he talked Mel Gibson into one.
That's Mel Gibson. And you talked Mel Gibson into being into our film.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well, that's the thing about the electric cars that was interesting at the time, is everything in our culture has become polarized. It's all left-right issues, and to some degree the environment has become a left-right issue. But the electric car is actually not a left-right issue for the most part. You know, there's some rare exceptions, but in very right-wing states, there's a lot of electric cars happening. You know, so I think the thing is Mel Gibson is certainly no liberal, but he loved the car, and a lot of people fell in love with the car, and for a lot of different reasons. And I think that was one of the things that was interesting in the interviews you got, is that it was a broad spectrum of political opinions that was united on a single idea.
Well, you opened this up, so how did you get Mel to participate in our documentary? Because he had been in The Patriot with you, that you produced.
He'd been in The Patriot, and like most people, he thought electric cars were going to be like golf carts. He just thought they weren't going to have any power to it. So I put him in the driver's seat of mine. I made sure we were on an empty street, and I said, slam the pedal down. And when his head snapped back, he was like, I got to have one of these.
I think that's the way we all were with that car. Yeah, there was nothing, you didn't see anything green about it. It just seemed like a super fast car.
Yeah.
I think that was a super surprise, and why so many of us became like big champions, because it wasn't like the cliche of a slow car, and we could see that the future of cars could truly be electric if they perform that well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the neatest things about EV1 is that it predated this current generation, where many of the manufacturers, thank God they're finally doing EVs, but what I hear a lot from engineers is we designed and engineered this car to make it perform just like its gas car equivalent, which is so unfortunate because most EVs drive so much better. And the EV1 predated all of that. So it was far faster and far more fun than anyone would have expected from this tiny little teardrop, kind of dorky looking car, depending on who you were. And it just blew the socks off everybody. And Tesla has done that since, but in a much, much higher dollar package. And so it was interesting to see how many different people the EV1 attracted that has carried over, and the market has broadened now that we're starting to get some variety. But you know, it was ahead of its time in that way because it just was better from the start, and it didn't apologize for it. It didn't try to be otherwise.
Well, let's wrap up our thing. With a story, talking about Tesla, and then maybe one or two questions, and we can do it. So Tesla's a great example. We talked about documentaries telling stories. We talked about how brands try to tell stories, how Dean tells stories in long-form narratives. Tesla is another example, in my view, of a story being told.